Дуже дякую за запрошення на цю конференцію. Thank you for the invitation to this conference. I would like to bring your attention back to the humanitarian situation in Ukraine in the connection with the war in Ukraine. And we always have to understand the extension of this humanitarian crisis. Actually, this crisis is the biggest humanitarian crisis in Europe since World War II. We have, just the numbers, we have more than 1,700,000, now it's a little bit lower, we had more than 1,700,000 internally displaced persons who had to leave their homes in the Donbass area and move to other places in Ukraine. About 1,100,000 people left Ukraine, mostly into the direction to Russia, but also into other directions to Poland, to Belarus, and to countries of the European Union. We have 4.4 million people who are affected by the war, including 580,000 children. 3.8 million people are in need of assistance. We have over 10,000 people killed and 24,000 people injured during this war. This means there is a tremendous need of humanitarian aid, social assistance, social services for these people. And this is what I would like to talk about with you. If you are looking at the situation on the humanitarian crisis, we have three different areas where the assistance is needed. One area is very specific and very difficult to be reached. That's the non-government controlled area in the Donbass, where we don't have really a clear picture what's going on there. But we know for sure that many people who worked in social services, in the health sector, they're leaving this area, and so many people are without any assistance. We are even presuming that people, older people who have need for assistance at home care services, and who don't get this assistance anymore, who can often not move anymore, will die or are dying in their places, in their apartments, in their houses, without assistance. And maybe later on, if we will have access to these areas, we will have to take the corpses out of these places, the people who died without assistance. We know that the education system is not functioning very well in these areas, but generally we don't have a clear picture. There is no systematic monitoring on this area. We can only assume what the needs are. And especially the access of humanitarian organizations is very restricted. By now, there are only some organizations of the United Nations who have access. My organization, Caritas Ukraine, till recently could assist people by bringing fuel to families for the winterization, for the winter time. So this is an area where we don't have a clear picture. A clearer picture we have of the area in the buffer zone on the side of the Ukrainian controlled area. And there are living about 200,000 people, especially elderly people. Many people who could leave left this area because they didn't see any perspective to stay there. I was in a village where formerly lived some 1,000 people. There are now 200 people, and among these 200 people, there are about 5-6 people who are younger than 65 years old. There is a very difficult situation because the elderly people need assistance, but they don't get this assistance. It's very difficult to bring food into this area. The people can't move freely because there is the danger of landmines, and the communication doesn't function very well. We made programs in this area, so-called cash for work programs, where we paid neighbors' salary who can assist other neighbors who are in need of assistance. These are the ways how we can work in these areas, because there is not enough personnel who can be engaged in social assistance for this area. And then generally we have the 1.7 million people, 1.6 million now, according to the official statistics, the internal displaced persons who are spread all over Ukraine, but generally they are in the belt around the Donbass, who very often are crossing the contact line, having contact to the other side, but they are especially also in need of assistance. That's the 4th year of the war, and the assistance is still needed. And then the question is, are there still internally displaced persons who need assistance as humanitarian assistance, or are these cases where the Ukrainian government has to have normal social services for their citizens? If you're looking at the situation, one of the biggest problems is the traumatization of the persons who are afflicted by the war. When I'm going to the eastern part of Ukraine, I was visiting a family with my social worker, a family of an old couple. The man had an amputated leg. The woman was sick. They needed assistance, and we brought this assistance to this person every day. But when I left with my social worker, a woman of about 30 years, she told me she herself is an internally displaced person, and she left the place where she lived before after nights and nights of shelling, where she was with her 2 children. One child of her, a boy of then 5 years, when he was leaving, before they left, he was speaking. And in the nights of shelling in a bunker, he lost his language. He lost his ability to speak. That's the traumatization, one of the traumatizations. According to the United Nations, we have about 60% of children who were affected by the war, who were witnessing violence, who were seeing shelling, who were traumatized. And it's interesting because we, as a society, do not know how to deal with this traumatization. We have young people, soldiers, in the hospitals, in the military hospitals, who don't have legs, who don't have arms. These are people who will need assistance a whole life, a whole lifetime. This is what Ukraine has to be prepared for the next decades. And here's the question, how can we, as a diaspora, assist Ukraine in these efforts? When we are looking into the humanitarian situation, it's also a big problem that this situation is not visible. We don't see that people see this situation. We don't see the people in need on the streets, in other humanitarian crises, like in the Syrian crisis. We see people standing, being in shelters, being in cities of 10 cities, and standing in line of soup kitchens. We don't see this in Ukraine. We actually do not know how the people are living. On the streets, they are looking like every other citizen. But if you're going into their places, into their houses, you see how that they are lacking everything, that they are absolutely in need of assistance. And this assistance has to be brought to them. What can we do as a diaspora community? My idea is we cannot raise money within our communities and try to assist the people and not doing it strategically. First of all, we should be the mediators between the needs in Ukraine and the people in Ukraine in need and the governments in the countries where we are living. If I'm looking at the work of my organization, within the 4 years of the war now, we raised about 36 million euros assistance for Ukraine, mainly coming from governments of different countries, mainly through our partner organizations in different countries through the Caritas network. But the main thing to do this is to raise the awareness for the social situation in Ukraine. And this is something what the Ukrainian diaspora can do and should do. But it should be done systematically. We have to see the needs, we have to communicate these needs to our governments in different countries, and we have to pressure these governments to assist the people in Ukraine. There's another point which I would talk about. This is the social services in Ukraine and the social system in Ukraine. We are in a process of the reform of the social system. Can I have a glass of water, please? What we see is the Ukrainian system, social system, has to be changed absolutely. We have an old system from the Soviet Union which doesn't function. It was a centralized system. It was not effective and is not effective. And actually that's a big problem because the social sphere in Ukraine is the sphere where is no focus given. It's not highly on the agenda. And it's so important that it comes very high on the agenda. We have a civil society which can have a big impact, but also the civil society needs assistance and especially also know-how. And this know-how can be given also from the people in the diaspora. This is a field where I see the perspective that we can cooperate in Ukraine. We need specialists who know how to remodel a social system, what will be the principles on which the social system will be based on. And this is the discussion where we are standing now in Ukraine, and how we can step by step remodel the system. I think this is also a question which is actually connected to the security of the country. Because till now, in the 26 years of independence in Ukraine, we didn't have a social upraise. There were always political protests, but there were no social protests. We have to make sure that also in the future we have a social system in place which is based on clear principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, personalism, and common good. This is something what is, I think, rooted in the Ukrainian tradition and what we should like, what we would like to achieve in Ukraine. A last point: if we are supporting Ukraine in the social sphere and also in the humanitarian assistance, we should do it in a systemic way, in a way where we can have a big impact on what we are doing. We have to base it on need assessments, on clear strategies, on clear prioritizations, so we will have an impact how to assist the people. The main thing is also to have concepts how we can empower the people in Ukraine to assist themselves, how we can bring the people who today had to leave the East into jobs, employment programs, livelihood programs. This is what has to be supported in Ukraine for now. Thank you.